Alright, so we'll start breaking down the AwryTimeLine for this week. So the five topics we'll be covering: voter suppression, especially in the midst of the pandemic that is breaking out. We'll move into how the pandemic is disproportionately affecting people of color and minorities. We'll talk about the various ways in which case that is happening. We will get into how it's affecting nations that are already strapped for resources, places like Iran, Palestine, and Yemen, how that is playing out there, and what the larger community is doing in response. We'll get into Venezuela and how the U.S. is continuing its warmongering despite, and how it's not being covered by the media, despite the fact that this is very important, has been played out for a better part of the past year. And then, of course, we'll end on the largest electoral news, which is that Bernie Sanders has dropped out of the race, leaving Joe Biden the presumptive Democratic nominee. We'll talk about what led to that and what we can do moving forward and provide insights with that. Yeah. So we'll begin with voter suppression. So this past Tuesday, Wisconsin held a primary that honestly should not have happened at all. There were, with this pandemic going on, it's clear that there will be transmission of cases, more people will get sick, more people will die, we're going to be flooding these hospitals. So it was bad for it to happen at all. But there were two sides that had very strong reasons to want it to happen, and they were both pushing for it. So we'll start with the Democratic side, which is, with this Wisconsin primary, obviously there's the Democratic primary happening between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, and Joe Biden was actually pushing for, in the days leading up to this primary, just like the other primaries that happened earlier on when this pandemic was starting to take hold, he's pushing for in-person voting to happen. He wanted it to go through. And the reason why he was doing that is he wants to shore up his electoral win. So this was before Bernie Sanders dropped out. Joe Biden and the Democratic Party were trying to wrap up this primary as soon as possible because Joe Biden honestly is not a great candidate. They didn't want the people to notice that. We'll actually get down later on to that people already are regretting going for Joe Biden and voting for him. So, yeah, Joe Biden was pushing for this primary to happen. Afterward, he said that it shouldn't have happened, that it was a threat to people's health. It doesn't matter because he wanted it to go on. But on the flip side, the GOP was similarly pushing for there to be a primary. In fact, they were the ones that were bringing it to court and arguing it. So in the end, it was the GOP for why the primary happened. Joe Biden was pushing for it, but just kind of rhetorically. But the GOP was actually taking it to court. Now, the reason the Republican Party wanted this primary to happen is there was a state Supreme Court seat up for grabs. So right now, the Republicans have a 3-2 advantage for the Supreme Court seat. And if turnout is high, that typically tends to hurt Republican Party, so they want to keep turnout as low as possible. End up being, I think, around like 3%. So with turnout so low, they almost certainly got their Supreme Court seat held. The results are not out yet because there's a lot of vote by mail that's been going on, and the vote by mail just needs to be postmarked by April 6th, April 7th. I'm not exactly sure when. So votes are still coming in. They're still processing it. But with turnout so low at just 3% of eligible voters in Wisconsin coming, it's very likely that the Republicans held on to the Supreme Court seat. Now, this is actually very important as we move into the November election. So the Republican Party wanted to hold on to this seat because Wisconsin is a case study in how bad you can get with gerrymandering. So in 2018, I believe, they received 46% of the vote, but ended up with 64% of the state's assembly or state senate seats. I'm not exactly sure which ones. And that's because they were able to systematically rig the system so that it benefits them. Now, with this pandemic going on, it's just more cover and a greater guise that they can disenfranchise more people, they can reduce the vote count, so that when we come into November, Wisconsin is still locked up for the Republican Party, which is notably going to help Trump. Wisconsin is one of those swing states that went for Trump over Clinton in 2016, ended up, being part of the reason why the election was flipped toward him, despite a lot of people and a lot of models showing that Clinton was more likely to win. So with the success in voter suppression in Wisconsin, especially using the pandemic as a cover, it's more likely that other states will be using the same thing. So the COVID-19 is turning out to be more than just an economic catastrophe with the stock market falling incredible amounts, but also with unemployment already getting up into, I think, 16 million with this week's unemployment report numbers. That number is, right now, it is effectively a 10% unemployment rate. It's expected to go as high as 20 to 30%. We're seeing it affect, of course, health. It's a virus, so it's going to be putting people in the hospital. It's going to be affecting their finances in that regard as people lose their insurance. It's going to be affecting our mental health as we're all kind of strapped indoors. So there's all these other problems and effects that COVID-19 is having, but now it's starting to pave the way for an electoral implication. We're only about a month or so into the actual, getting hits with the pandemic. It's, of course, been around for a lot longer, but at least here in New York, they only started closing things down around, at least where I worked, was closed down March 12th, and I think that was pretty early, and other places started following suit, public schools, all that. So we're only a month in, and we haven't even come close to the peak. There are projections, so on covidactnow.org, it's not projected that we will hit the peak, at least in New York State, until about mid-May. But that's all kind of ignoring the fact that these pandemics tend to come in waves. So even if this first wave lasts through just June or something, which seems to be the general projection, at least early on when they did 90-day moratoriums on evictions and a 90-day moratorium on mortgages, even if the first wave just lasts that long, once people start to go out and start to work again, there's going to be a second wave, and possibly even a third wave after that. This is how these pandemics go along. The 1918 Spanish flu did the exact same thing. So what that means is that we're likely still going to be under some sort of, quarantine, lockdown, COVID-19, fear when the general election happens. I don't know. I don't think that we are going to be postponing it, but that might be, but it doesn't even need to be postponed, because the GOP, with using Wisconsin as an example, where they can suppress votes, or they can, close down polling locations. I mean, in Milwaukee, there were originally 180 polling locations, and then they reduced it down to 5, mainly because, poll workers weren't showing up, but also because it's a benefit for them to close down as many as possible. That's not smart in the context of pandemic, because now you're putting more people into a more concentrated location. So it doesn't even make sense at the outfront, but that's how it ended up being. So if we go into November and the election, is on schedule, we're going for the general, I think, November 4th, November 5th, what's going to happen is they might be able to use the same kind of tactics Wisconsin rolled out, maybe some of these further states with the primary, even though, it's not contested on the Democratic side, these states will still hold primaries for delegates and for whatever, for local elections. We're going to probably see a lot of states using COVID-19 as a kind of a trial run to see how they can suppress the vote in order to directly benefit their constituency. I mean, Trump, when he gave a press conference where he talked about, mail-in voting, and a reporter asked him, I think it was from NBC, let me double check this. MSNBC, so on April 8th, so that was this past Wednesday, a reporter asked him, what do you think about mail-in voting? That's a great way where we can avoid kind of this mess of a bunch of people coming in to a location trying to vote. And Trump very steadfastly said, no, we should not do that because it's high chance of voter fraud. This is actually just not true. I mean, experts have come out and done analysis, done studies, and said, no, there's slightly more voter fraud with mail-in voting, but it's so insignificant in the grand scheme of things that there's no reason why we should ban mail-in voting, which increases voter turnout and increases access to the ballot, just because there might be a small uptick in what is already an extremely small, extremely minute number of cases and problems of voter fraud. But his reasoning was the most telling, which is that if you get ballots out to more people, then the Republicans are not going to win. It's that, like I said before, it's pretty common knowledge that when voter turnout goes up, the Democrats tend to fare better. And so with mail-in voting, it's likely going to be that case. But here's the thing is, right now in 2 states, Washington and Colorado, there's already universal um, mail-in voting. So I'm originally from Washington State. When the 2016 election was going on, I was here in New York, and my parents, they received my ballot, and they just mailed it to me in New York, and I filled it out, and I mailed it back. So it's already been done, and as far as I can tell, I've not seen a single study that goes through, okay, with Washington and Colorado, there's rampant voter fraud. Let us tell you why there's such rampant voter fraud. It's because of the mail-in voting. That's just not a thing. It's a scare tactic that's used. And so the solution to this COVID-19, reducing the vote and making polling places literal possible, death traps for mail-in voting, there's hesitation to do that because the right knows that they are going to be losing electoral seats. Like I said, we'll see how this moves forward, how further primaries go, with either reducing voter turnout, or maybe there will be some clever, creative ways to make it seem like voter turnout is going to go up and there's increased access, but actually there isn't. I don't know, but it's very telling and very worrying that this pandemic is already being used as a scapegoat to further these electoral wants and the electoral chances of a particular party. Naomi Klein's shock doctrine, which kind of breaks all this stuff down, how when there is mind you, I haven't read the book yet, it's on my list, I'm going to be reading it, but from what I understand, it's the idea that when there is a mass shock to the system, and people are kind of like scrambling to figure it out, those who are already in power use this as an excuse to further the ends that they already hold. So that could play out with COVID-19, where the GOP and the Republican Party use this shock of a pandemic to further disenfranchise people and secure their own kind of careers and futures moving forward. All right, so we'll move on to the impact on minorities in with this COVID-19. So I'm just going to read off a few statistics for you, because they're really telling. I'm going to do the most shocking ones. So this is from CBS. So Chicago, 70% of the COVID-19 deaths and 50% of the infections are from African American people, despite the fact that 32% of the city's population is African American. Louisiana is almost exactly the same. 70% of Louisiana's deaths and 70% of Louisiana's deaths, 32% of the population are African American. Now, this is disproportionately high. Dr. Fauci, who is kind of leading this pandemic response, at least, de facto with the White House, has said it's not because African Americans are, by nature more susceptible to being infected by the disease. I think the same way that men are, don't quote me on that. But it's the fact that they have a lot more comorbidity symptoms, so they tend to have higher blood pressure, more heart problems, and asthma compared to the white population. And that just means that when they get infected, it's likely to be more severe. They might be more likely to go to the hospital and get tested in the first place. But at the end of the day, they are getting more impacted by this. But it goes a little bit further than just underlying health conditions. In fact, underlying health conditions might actually be explained by this next thing, which is that there are economic factors that are impacting the African American, the black community, more than they are impacting the white community. And that actually bodes well, because when you look at the numbers for Hispanic people, where am I looking at this at? Yeah. So, no, I don't have anything for that. I thought I did. I must have just not written it down. That's okay. So, but the Latino community, it's pretty much the same thing, where they are getting infected at a higher rate than their population would say. So it's just disproportionately high compared to what one would expect, or even across the board. A large reason for that is the economic factors. So African American families tend to be making significantly less money than white families. On top of that, they tend to be working jobs that are more service sector jobs. Here in New York, shouldn't probably be using that, but where I live in New York, okay, the community, the economy, the local economy is a lot of built on just service sector jobs, and I live in a very highly African American community. So what that means is that they're going out there and they're working at these jobs where they're essential workers, and they have to show up to work. And now they're being exposed to a lot more people compared to white individuals in New York tend to be working in more, affluent, higher class jobs. And so they can work from home, they can insulate themselves, and just in general, they have more money, they have more wealth, they have the savings where they can isolate themselves. So with the infection rate being higher among these African American communities, a lot of it does come down to socioeconomic factors. It's not just the fact of where they work, it's the fact that they have to keep working where they work. It's not just the fact that, not just that they're working in these locations, but on top of that, the access to information is a lot more restrictive for them. So in terms of internet access, it's very difficult for these communities to maybe get the information that they need to get compared to the more plugged in, affluent, whites, families who are out there and are able to gain access to information. It's probably one of the bigger ones. So in probably the greatest example for why this is the case, especially linking socioeconomics to infection rates, is right here in New York City, which has turned into the infection capital of the world. Like, we weren't even close to being the first ones affected. We saw it happen in Italy, like 2 weeks before it even started hitting us, and we still ended up being the number one city in the world when it comes to infections. Now, there's a stark contrast in New York with socioeconomic status and the infection rate. So the top 5 kind of neighborhoods that have the highest positive test rate. So these are people who took the test, and the highest percentage, the top 5 highest percentage, the average income per worker is $26,708. So that's less than minimum wage full time, mind you. So because New York City minimum wage is $15, that means that the average income for these 5 boroughs, which that have the highest positive test rate, it's $26,708. That's less than minimum wage. So these people are already, struggling to get by in a socioeconomic standpoint. Now, if you look at the top 5 neighborhoods that have the lowest positive infection rates, their average income is $118,166. So it's nearly 4 times, it's actually over 4 times as much money that's being earned in these places that are testing positive at a much smaller rate. Now, of course, you can look at that and be like, okay, because they are more affluent, they have greater access to tests, and so people who are asymptomatic but just worried can go and they can get a test, and so that's what's bringing the infection rate down lower. But that in and of itself is a problem, that these people can get this test despite not having any symptoms and turn out negative. I think the difference was about 78% for the top 5 highest neighborhoods and like 30% for the lowest. So what you're seeing there is the socioeconomic status is a large indicator of how people are going to be faring as the virus starts to deal more damage to the community. And it's very well known in New York City that we're extremely segregated based on race and socioeconomic status, as in the two are largely one and the same when it comes to the neighborhoods. There was an infographic that was going around Twitter not too long ago that was showing like hotspots for like people testing positive for COVID-19, the death rate for COVID-19, and then also they were doing it based off of how much money these places were making and kind of the racial composition of these places, and they all like matched up perfectly. So these neighborhoods that are making less money tend to have higher concentrations of people of color, just there are more of them living there as a percentage of the population, and they're also testing positive more frequently and dying from this. So it's all linked together, and this is the case study for it right here in New York. It doesn't. There's this whole thing on like liberal Twitter that's like, oh no, This virus, it doesn't look at your skin color or your socioeconomic status. It affects us all equally, and so we all need to come together. It's like, that's factually not true. It's empirically not true that that's the case. People who are wealthier are able to hide themselves away. They're able to just lock themselves in their apartments and just order food nonstop, order groceries nonstop. Meanwhile, the people who have to go out to work are the ones who are getting them their groceries. They're the ones who tend to be people of color, who are going out there and doing the shopping, picking up the food, delivering it to the the apartment, often doing no contact delivery where they just like set it down and leave because because the people who are in the apartment they're able to restrict themselves from going outside at all. While other people who don't have savings set up, who don't own their apartment, who are still paying rent because Governor Cuomo didn't enact a rent freeze or a rent, kind of waiver, they have to go out there, they have to keep working, and they're just going to be more likely to be exposed to the virus. And it's a travesty that this is the case, where in a city that is like a liberal beacon is kind of the hotspot for the racial and socioeconomic disparities of this virus. But of course, beyond that is how it's affecting communities that aren't quite hard hit yet. So pretty much everywhere in the country, I would assume, I believe at this point, all the public schools have gone to online learning. So you're no longer going into a school with 200, 300, 400 students sitting in classroom with 30 other kids and learning. They're all online. But that poses a lot of difficulties. Now, if you're in college and you're doing online learning, it's not that big of a deal. Maybe your professor does like a Zoom call or just records a lecture. It's easy stuff. You know how to handle yourself. But when you're not in college, so if you're in high school or middle school or elementary school, it can be very difficult to gain even access to these resources. And a lot of that has to come from the fact that broadband internet is not widely accessible. So let me pull up what stats I have on here. Yeah. So there are 12 million public school students in the United States do not have access to broadband internet, which means that if schooling is online, these 12 million students cannot get access to schooling. There's just no possible way for them to do it. And so there was like a question or a breakdown of how many of these students are like actually attending their classes or doing their work. Since it's moved online, it's a lot easier to just kind of slough it off. If you're not showing up there and you have to turn in the homework physically, it's easier to put it to the side. And 41% of teenagers, specifically 47% of those in public schools, said that they have not gone to class since their school moved online. And that some schools are on spring break, and so, of course, some of them haven't gone to class since school's moved online because they haven't had class since they moved online. But that number actually spikes. They don't have the racial breakdowns for African Americans and Latinos for whether they're able to show up for class or whether they're doing so, but when it goes into the racial breakdown for how worried they are about their educational prospects, 66% of African Americans and 70% of Hispanic students are worried about their educational future. And that makes a lot of sense, because if we have 12 million students who don't have access to internet, those 12 million students are probably in large part students whose families don't have the money, don't have the resources to afford internet. And the ones, like I've said, who have the lower wealth within their families are African American and Hispanic students. So if they're worried about their educational prospects, it's likely because they don't have access to internet, they don't have access to these resources that maybe their more affluent peers are having access to. But it kind of goes further beyond that, which is if you are a student who is trying to get into good schools, it's your junior year now, you're approaching your senior year, and you're kind of frazzled trying to prepare yourself for the application period, you need to be in school talking with counselors and have them walk you through it, get teachers right there with you, a lot of ways. Like my dad went to college, my mom didn't, but even then I was still interacting, reaching out to teachers a lot to help walk me through the process and get them to write me letters of recommendation. So these students like who are juniors or even like, sophomores, maybe they're worried about how, standardized testing is one of the things. I don't think they're doing any standardized testing for the next while. So there are just a lot of students right now who thought they had a system in place, a plan in place, who now are unable to do it. And the students who are, as we're seeing here, the ones who are most worried about this, probably rightfully so, are African American and Hispanic students. So we're just seeing how disproportionate this virus will affect different communities. We'll see it play out more and more as we start to see it infect jails. Rikers Island right now is the number one. If you break it down even beyond city and like further, Rikers Island has the highest infection rate in the world by 1.5 miles. So we're going to be seeing probably within the next month or so this infect other jails, which are largely inhabited by African American individuals from the systemic, racism through the police targeting and court system. That is, it's just going to continue to be a problem down the line, and we'll see that manifest itself. So when you hear people say, "Oh no, this affects everybody equally, nobody's immune," it's just not true. And you can't listen to that. All it's doing is it's a distraction from understanding that no, this is a real problem. And in fact, it's not like it just brought up these problems. These problems have always been here, but people will just turn their blind eye and ignored it entirely. We're now seeing years of systemic injustice from the top down come right up and start to affect these communities in ways that are just horrific. So let's hope that we get some changes, but we'll see. All right. Next, we're going into 3 nations in particular that are being affected by this virus in pretty egregious ways. So those are Iran, Palestine, and Yemen. Now, of course, there are a lot in South American countries that are also just getting ransacked. I think in Colombia, they're getting to the point where they're just straight up burning bodies just so they don't have to report a higher number. So they can say, things are all fine here. Brazil is just a mess right now with Bolsonaro. I think he tested positive or something, and then he didn't release his results and went out and just met with a bunch of people. I don't even know. But we're going to go into nations that have already been attacked relentlessly and cut off relentlessly by the U.S. and U.S. allied states, and how with this COVID-19 pandemic happening, it's just a new form of genocide for them. So we'll start with Iran. Pretty recently, Iran has come into the national spotlight in early January. I think it's like January 3rd. We launched an airstrike that killed one of the top generals in Iran, General Soleimani. And that nearly led us to direct war, like a hot war with Iran. We're doing other dumb stuff with them. But even before that, like in 2019, or even 2018, I'm not exactly sure. Pretty much since Trump took over the presidency and put Mike Pompeo in charge of Secretary of State, we've just been escalating with Iran nonstop and applying so many crippling sanctions on them. If we go back to the Iran nuclear deal that Obama passed in 2015, essentially what we're doing, this is a very quick breakdown, is we're giving Iran back their own money that we took from them, and in response, all of their nuclear reactors, they will only use those for energy producing capabilities. In fact, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Association, can come by at any time, inspect those locations to make sure that they're not getting above a certain enrichment level, which would hint that they're trying to weaponize the uranium. So we would give them back money. They would allow the IAEA to come in at any time. And the only thing that we needed to do to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon for 10 years or something until 2025 was not put sanctions on them. That's it. We didn't need to do anything else. And we put sanctions on them. We put economic sanctions on them. I think it was to take out, to prevent oil trades or something. But we went a little further than that, which is we also threatened to sanction anybody who traded with Iran. So we didn't just say, hey, we're not trading with you on these things. We don't want it. We're saying anybody else who trades with you, we're going to cut them off. And of course, we're an economic superpower. There's no way that a country like, Germany can be like, oh yeah, I'm going to keep trading with Iran and cut the US off from my supply. No, it's not possible. So we just crippled them entirely. We started escalating tensions with them by putting military bases around their entire country, propping up Saudi Arabia, which is openly hostile to Iran, and Israel as well. We did everything wrong if we wanted to calm down the situation with Iran. But then, now that the COVID-19 pandemic is going on, we're doing even more to make things awful for them. So the International Monetary Fund was trying to do a $20 billion loan to Iran to help them get, medical equipment and basically have so many fewer people die from this pandemic, and we blocked it. Secretary Pompeo and Donald Trump were concerned that the money that would be going to Iran would actually be going to prop up the heads of Iran, and it would lead to more terrorism. They called Iran the world's leading state sponsor of terror. It's absurd at its face, even if you're looking at terror within that region specifically. Like Saudi Arabia openly props up radical jihadist groups. But then if you even know the most basic knowledge about Islam, you'd know that Iran is Shia Muslim, and Shia Muslim is like the peaceful part of Muslim compared to Saudi Arabia, which is Sunni. So we're saying, no, you cannot have this money because you're just going to use it for terrorism. We don't believe you will use it to help your people, even though their people are dying, like, I think at the peak or something, or not even at the peak. We haven't even hit the peak with them. I think I read a couple of weeks ago that it's like every 9 minutes an Iranian citizen is dying from COVID-19. I can't remember where I read that from, but that's the thing is they're going through this just like any other nation is. And in fact, they're going through it worse because they can't get these medical supplies. They can't get the help from the international community. And all we're doing is we're just shafting them. Now, the International Monetary Fund, we're not actually going to be blocking this vote to give them money, because how the IMF works is if they will only pretty much bring something to the table if they know it's going to be passed unanimously. And we have veto power. So all we do is we go up there and we say, yeah, if you bring this up, we're going to say no to it. And the IMF doesn't even waste their time. So it's never going to come about that, yes, we specifically voted no on this money going to Iran. That's just not going to happen. But by saying that we're going to do it, effectively we cut it off. We just signal that we're going to say no, and the IMF not even going to waste their time. So we're cutting off this nation that really needs the supplies. I listened to a podcast. I'm forgetting the name of the podcast. I'll put the link in the description here. But it was with an Iranian nurse, Zara Shafi, who was basically talking about how, yeah, Iran, they're making progress with their health institution, especially on the public side, but it's not the easiest thing to do when the whole world is working against you. So if we were to give them this money, it's obvious. We know the money would go toward helping the actual people, but Pompeo, his whole shtick is topple countries that we don't like. And the only reason we don't like Iran is because we toppled their leader to put in our puppet, and then they revolted against our puppet. That's it. There's really not much else. And so now they're going to be hit one of the hardest in the world. The other one that's going to be hit hard is Yemen. So Yemen has been under Saudi Arabia attack since, I believe, 2014. When the Houthi rebels took over Yemen, they toppled whoever was leading that, and Saudi Arabia was like, we're not having that, we're going on the offensive, started a bombing campaign. We actually, for I don't know how many years, but we were refueling Saudi jets mid-air doing this bombing campaign on Yemen. We've stopped doing that. I believe a bill, who was it? it wasn't Mike Huckabee. It was some Lindsey Graham. No, not Lindsey Graham. There's some Republican senator who worked with, I think, Bernie to get this passed, and was like, all right, so we're gonna stop the U.S. from refueling Saudi bombers like mid-air, so they can turn around faster and kill more children. But Saudi Arabia has also been blockading the ports of Yemen, so food and medicine have not been able to get in. There's been a cholera outbreak in Yemen for at least the past year. You solve cholera by putting 1 tablet into the water supply. That's all it takes to fix it, but their ability to get medicine was just entirely cut off. So they weren't being able to be assisted at all. And it's been a genocide. It's been the worst humanitarian crisis in the world for who knows how many years running. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic, it's going to be hitting. I'm sure it's already hit Yemen. It's going to be taken off like a wildfire. Now, Saudi Arabia has stepped back and said, oh, okay, we're going to do a 2-week ceasefire on Yemen, which is absurd on its face. Like, their reasoning was, this coronavirus is really hitting Yemen hard. Maybe this will finally bring them to the table and they will negotiate with us and we will put an end to this needless war. This is from Al Jazeera, which tends to be a pretty good news source for stuff going on in the Middle East, but Al Jazeera is funded by Qatar, and Qatar is kind of with Saudi Arabia on taking out Yemen, so the bias in the article is clear of how Saudi Arabia is like, oh, we need to stop this ceasefire, or we need to stop this war. We'll do a two-week ceasefire, come to the table. We don't want your country to be just devastated by COVID-19. It obviously, Saudi Arabia does want that to happen. This 2-week ceasefire, I've heard from, I guess it's rumors and stuff, that no, they just actually didn't want their own people to be infected, or around the area. I don't even know. But yeah, it's Yemen, unless Saudi Arabia lifts all these sanctions and stops blockading their ports and allows medical supplies to come through to help treat this virus, I mean, Yemen is going to be just like a lot of these other places where they're definitely going to get, ruined, but it could have been a lot less bad had we allowed this help to come through. But the reason why I say less bad is, even if, we were to give Yemen the top of the line, stuff like every nation in the world came together to say, like, all right, let's see how well, like, we can prevent death in Yemen specifically, it still wouldn't be enough. Because, like I said, Saudi Arabia's been bombing this place for 5 years. They've been cutting them off for so long that the institutions that would otherwise exist just are not there. There's nothing that the world can do to prevent that from being one of the worst, hit locations in the world. It's going to be right up there with Iran, with some South American countries, probably some, more Central African countries as well, even though it's kind of funny, Africa blocked off immigration from Europe, which is, kind of funny because usually historically it's been the other way around, where Europe is like, oh, we need to cut off these, the Africans, the Muslims, but then they go in there and like raid their people anyway. But yeah, Yemen is just going to be terribly hit. And then, of course, the third place is Palestine, which is being occupied by Israel right now. And I haven't read into this, I haven't come across any articles explicit on how Israel plans to deal with an outbreak that happens there. I know there was a rabbi who just got infected recently, and so it obviously it's hitting Israel. It's going to be hitting Palestine, but I wonder how it's going to play out if this becomes large scale and they start to overflow their hospitals and their ICU beds, because it's pretty obvious, knowing how Israel's acted these past several years, that they're going to institute some kind of requirements or litmus test to be like, all right, we have 2 people and 1 hospital bed. Who gets it? It's probably going to come down to if one of them is Jewish and the other one is Muslim, it's probably going to be the Jewish person who gets it, just based on how Israel has worked through their apartheid laws leading up to this. So we'll see how that goes down in Palestine. Again, places like the West Bank in Gaza just completely cut off. And we're supporting it. That's the thing, is all three of these nations, they're just getting hammered, or will be hammered, by COVID-19. We are supporting their eventual demise, and we've been supporting their demise for so long now. It's unbelievable that, or it's not unbelievable, it's actually right in line with the U.S. interests in terms of keeping oil money, keeping regional hegemony, that we want to take these places down, and the virus is just another great way for us to do it, and a great scapegoat for us. Because I will not be surprised if in 2 years, 3 years, when Yemen is just wiped off the map, there's going to be some very smart academics who look back and be like, yes, the reason for this is COVID-19. They just couldn't protect themselves for whatever reason. It was the Arab mind, the diseased Arab mind, just prevented them from countering it effectively. They didn't do any, nationwide lock. It's just stupid shit like that is going to come out. Even though it's Western nations and Western-friendly nations in the region just doing whatever they can to eliminate any opposition or anything that they don't like, anything that doesn't line up exactly with them. So it's hard to watch. It's going to continue to be hard to watch. And the U.S. governments, especially those in power, can and should do what, just lift sanctions, help them out, and pressure these nations to do the same. Because this is, it's a disgusting humanitarian crisis, and it will continue to be. It's hard to watch. All right. Next we're going to go on to Venezuela. So everything up to this point has been all COVID-19. Of course, that's the leading kind of story in the world right now. But there are issues getting buried underneath the heave of COVID-19 articles, which is that we are once again escalating with Venezuela for no reason. If you recall, I believe it was last year in 2019. It might have actually been in 2018, though, when we just declared Juan Guaido the president of Venezuela. Just like, it's him, because we don't like Maduro. Venezuela has been kind of this punching bag for the right for a long time, and it's just kind of continued on that way. So we don't like Maduro. We said, Juan Guaido, you are the president of Venezuela, and a whole bunch of other Western European countries did the exact same thing, just declared him the president, and it didn't work. We just tried to do a coup, and it didn't work. The people of Venezuela stuck with Maduro. Maduro was, I believe, elected some years back. I'm not exactly sure. And so now with COVID-19 dominating the news cycle, we're able to escalate more with Venezuela. So recently we actually put some, I don't know if they were battleships, but we stationed some ships outside of Venezuela with this idea that, Maduro is involved in a narcotics trade, and so it's because of Venezuela that all these drugs are getting the U.S. There's a giant bounty on Maduro's head and all of his top officials, and so it's nonsense. There's no reason for it. But this is just standard fare in Washington, D.C. right now, is you just look at the head of another state, make up charges against them, put a bounty on their head, and then send your military over to surround that nation and, start rattling the saber. So, where was I going? Yeah, so there's Pompeo posted something on Twitter, this quote, I'm going to read it out. So this was on April 8th, which was this past Wednesday. Pompeo tweeted, quotes, "Thank you to the..." Okay, I can't read my own handwriting. Thank you to the dozens of countries that have expressed support for the new Venezuela framework. It's time for Maduro to go and replace his illegitimate dictatorship with a legitimate transitional government that can hold free and fair elections to represent all Venezuelans. All right, so let's start off with illegitimate dictatorship. This is just asserted by Pompeo and the Trump administration. Just, yep, they're illegitimate and they are a dictatorship. I'm not defending Maduro. I'm not saying, no, this is, it's wonderful stuff, but it's absurd that they're just coming in there and be like, you're not legitimate and you're a dictatorship. They might be a dictatorship. It doesn't matter at the end of the day because it's not in the U.S.'s interest. But furthermore, for Pompeo to say that we want a legitimate transitional government and the U.S. gets to choose what that government is and what makes it legitimate is just, it's laughable. It's a joke. And I'm assuming they mean Juan Guaido, because at the recent State of the Union address, Juan Guaido showed up randomly, and you had Nancy Pelosi giving him a standing ovation for just being present. This dude he's just showing up at a bunch of random Western European nations and the U.S. and Canada, just thunderous applause, he's some kind of celebrity. And then he goes back to his home country, and he gets off the plane, just gets manhandled by his own citizens. How can you say that this is the legitimate leader of Venezuela, and they need to institute him so he could be a transitional leader? That's absolute bullshit. It's preposterous to claim that in the first place. But then to go on further and be like, oh yeah, to hold free and fair elections. Here in the U.S., we're doing free and fair elections with, voter suppression and holding a primary in the middle of a pandemic. You're a great example for what Venezuela can aspire to be. But that's kind of thing is we've wanted to topple Maduro. We've wanted to take out the leadership in Venezuela for quite some time now. And with the news stories just being the way they are, this so easily gets buried. You're not going to see, you wouldn't see it before, but now you're definitely not going to see CNN or MSNBC coming out there and being like, oh, look at this. This is, the United States is trying to interfere with, another nation's election. Actually, MSNBC, it would be funny if MSNBC did that because they've been saying, Russia's been interfering with our election. That's beside the point. Nobody's going to pick this up. It's only going to be left-wing outlets that you probably already know that are looking at this this should not be happening, and they're getting away with a lot more than they should be able to get away with because COVID-19 is rampaging. But really, this is just showing our priorities. We have the Secretary of State going out there and just keep going with what his predetermined conclusions were. Just like I said, Naomi Klein's shock doctrine. This is almost no, it's not exactly what my understanding of it. Again, I haven't read the book. I know I need to read the book. It's going to be read, but that's the thing is now there is this cover through for which Mike Pompeo and the Trump administration can just do what they've always wanted to do, and it won't even come close to being covered. Now, I wouldn't be surprised. I don't think he's invoked this yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if the U.S. government starts to pivot and be like, actually, yeah, we need to replace Maduro because look at how poorly he's, treating. I'm blanking on my word. How he's governing this COVID-19 pandemic. It's so poor. We need a true, legitimate leader because somebody who is democratically elected would not, let this happen under their administration. Just some nonsense like that, and that's their justification for Juan Guaido taking over the country. So, it's just showing how our priorities are all messed up, how we're still going ham with just our geopolitical blunderings. We're failing, across the country with these wars and stoking up tensions. And now, we're not even having a reckoning and being like, oh shit, maybe there's more important stuff we can focus on, but we're not going to focus on it. Instead, we are just going to keep going with our predetermined goals and make sure that we get them this time now that we have the media cover. All right. Last thing we're going to cover is, of course, like I said, the largest news election stuff going on this past week. So Bernie Sanders has dropped out of the Democratic primary. He was, the front runner for a very long time, even going back to when he announced his candidacy. He was the front runner then. You had people like, on CNN, Chris Cillizza being like, no, the front runner is actually, Kamala Harris or Beto O'Rourke or Cory Booker. Didn't even come close to making it to the first primary. But for people who had functioning brains, it was obvious that Bernie Sanders was the front runner. He continued to be a front runner. Every now and then, he got kind of upstaged for a hot second by somebody else. Like Elizabeth Warren was the front runner for a period of time. But it was very clear that Bernie Sanders was a very serious candidate. And once the primary started, that steamrolled. So Iowa happened and all the fuckery that happened there. Pete was looked at as, he's in the lead. But then New Hampshire, Nevada, there were talks that, it's already over, probably. If he just wins South Carolina, it's over. As in, there's not even a competition at this point. But South Carolina was won by Joe Biden. It was actually just Joe Biden did extremely well there. And that happened on Friday? Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Yeah, Friday or Saturday. I don't know. But after Joe Biden won, there's just a 72-hour, media craze, just propping up Joe, being like, look at him. He's definitely going to be the winner now. He's got all this African-American support. Even though polls leading up to South Carolina, like national ones, actually had Bernie beating Biden in terms of African-American support. But after South Carolina, the James Clyburn endorsement, it steamrolled from there. The media backed behind Joe Biden entirely. You had Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar and drop out and endorse Biden, and Beto O'Rourke just came out of the woodwork to endorse Biden. I think it's like the first time, I don't want to say the first time ever, but Pete Buttigieg was leading Joe Biden, I believe, in delegates and dropped out and supported Biden. Don't quote me on that. I didn't look it up before this. I think that just hit my mind right there. But yeah, it's one of those things where even if that's not true, like Pete Buttigieg, if Joe Biden was in the running, Pete Buttigieg was definitely in the running. But they dropped out and they endorsed Biden, and Super Tuesday came along. It was pretty much a four-way race between Biden, Bernie, Bloomberg, and Warren, and Biden ended up just not entirely sweeping, but just dominating the field on Super Tuesday, and that's when things started to look pretty bleak for Bernie Sanders. He went on and he was no longer, the obvious front runner. And as primaries kept going on, it just kept going to Biden one after the other. And just this past, I believe, Wednesday, Bernie Sanders he suspended his campaign, so he's still technically in the running. He's going to be on the ballots. Any delegates he accrues from votes will translate into delegates he will have at the convention when they're trying to figure out the platform, the Democratic platform for the next 4 years or whatever. But he is officially out of the race. It's something that a lot of us saw coming. I'm sorry, I'm trying to read what I have written here. My handwriting should be a lot better since I have so much time to prepare for this now. But yeah, so that's basically the background. So there were a lot of pressures that came into Bernie dropping out. So there are people on the left who are saying, Bernie, you need to stay in, man, because you are a voice for less. We want you to take it all the way to the convention. I believe that over half the states still hadn't voted yet, or half the contests hadn't come out, give or take, a few. So for him to drop out at that point, a lot of us were saying, no, don't do that. Stay in. We want to vote for you. The math is difficult, but we're in unprecedented times. Everything you've been talking about for the past 5 years, you're getting proved right day after day with this pandemic happening. Don't just let it go to Joe. But then there are other people who are saying, no, dude, you need to drop out. These are mainly the centrists and the vote blue no matter who Democrats who are saying you need to drop out because the longer you stay in, the more you're helping Trump, and you're going to guarantee a Trump win if you stay in. And listen, here's the thing: is Bernie, I believe, largely has kind of bought into that mindset that the reason Clinton lost in 2016 was because he stayed in. Now that's entirely not true. Which is, if you look at the Bernie to Trump voters in 2016, it was 18% or something. But then in 2008, it was 26% of Clinton primary backers went for John McCain. So it was, and also in 2012, 2012, the people who I'm forgetting what the statistic was, but essentially this was a pretty historic low in 2016 for a group of primary supporters to go for the other team. Usually it's a lot higher than that. But Bernie was pressured by that. I think he also was just uncomfortable because he's a fundamentally decent man. I think he was uncomfortable with people even feeling pressured to go to the polls with the pandemic happening. For him to stay in the race, it's kind of this implicit thing of maybe some people who are like, man, I got to go out there and vote for Bernie. With him suspending his campaign, they now don't feel that pressure to go out. Now, it would still, of course, benefit the movement if they were to go out and vote, but it's now a very, abstract benefit of okay, you can get delegates to, change the platform. It's not this, very black and white overt of you might let him be the nominee and therefore the president. So there's less incentive of his own supporters to go out there and vote for him. But he felt pressured one way or another and decided that, he was going to suspend his campaign. And now we're left struggling and wondering, okay, what do we do post-mortem? Now, there are a lot of analyses out there. Some of them are pretty rigorous. For the most part, it's just people going out there and being like, okay, I think this, I think that. I haven't seen any detailed studies, statistical breakdowns or anything like that. Not that that's necessarily needed, but it's, it shows that there's been a very serious effort into look to why Bernie's campaign failed. Some people have said he wasn't mean enough, he wasn't tough enough on Joe Biden. I think that's actually fair. I think that he should have, especially after Super Tuesday, been tougher on Joe Biden, considering Joe Biden was his only competition at that point. But then some people are saying, no, he shouldn't have done that. Apparently they had internal polling that said that when Bernie went negative on Biden, it actually hurt him. They're saying Bernie should have been nicer to him. I have not come across anybody who said that Bernie should have been nicer, but I have come across people who said that Bernie should not have been meaner. Some people are pushing back against that kind of narrative. A lot of kind of focus has been put onto mainstream media and the fact that left media outlets have a dominance on young people and very specific sectors of the electorate, but they don't have that wide just range to get out to everybody the way that MSNBC and CNN and CBS have access to, where they can just dominate the airwaves and reach tens of millions of people every single night, the way that the Young Turks would not be able to. So I think the media critique is very important, but essentially there's going to be a lot of post-mortem analysis for where we go from here moving forward with the movements. I'm actually reading this book, Bigger Than Bernie, and I'll be doing a review on it, eventually. Once I finish it, I'm taking it really slow. But it's this idea that, okay, what do we do moving forward? Because at the end of the day, Bernie was a leader, but he was a leader of a movement, and the movement carries on even without him explicitly being at the helm. So there's going to be a lot of post-mortem analysis, but now we're looking at what we have left. And what we have left is Joe Biden. So let's start with what Biden does not have that is necessary to win in November. I am not going to come out and say that Biden has zero chance. Biden has a very low chance, okay? So let's start with the fact that Biden has zero ground game. He does not have any people. Okay, granted, he can't really do it anymore, But even before the pandemic broke out, he didn't have people going around canvassing, knocking on doors. He didn't have people, phone banking or text banking. His actual operations where were with volunteers going out there and doing the work was minimal. His donors, he's almost entirely supported by big money donors. Small dollar Biden supporters, they just basically don't exist. Now, of course, they're out there, but it's nowhere near what Sanders had or Bernie had and what is necessary to win in November. He does not have the support of, like I said, left media organizations. Now, of course, I just said, left media organizations couldn't swing the primary. What does Joe Biden need moving into the general with them? Well, they do influence, like I said, very select parts of the electorate. And if these people are tepidly supporting him or just outright not supporting him, it's going to be pretty difficult for him to reach out to and win over these voters. And that goes right in line with the fact that his young support is mind-bogglingly low. Like, you look at the breakdowns of the primary between Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden and where their support came from, it's like 45 is the stark line, where if you're under 45, it was overwhelming in favor of Bernie Sanders. And if you're over 45, it's overwhelming in favor of Joe Biden. So there's a stark generational divide that happens there. And you can argue pretty well that, okay, well, it's the older voters who tend to, turn out to vote. And so if you're going to have the support of one or the other, you want the support of the older voters. But there's this great, I have it right here. Yeah, the Pew Research Center, I think this was from 2016, might have been 2018, but they asked non-voters, hey, why didn't you vote? You're eligible to vote. Maybe you're not registered and stuff, but why didn't you vote? And 25% of them, so 40% of people didn't vote in 2016. 25% of them, so that's 10%, said, I'm just not inspired. Joe Biden is not going to inspire anybody. So that's just one of the things he doesn't have. This. So old people, they turn out to vote. Those young people who don't turn out to vote, it might be because they're just not inspired. Sagar and Jetty over at Rising makes this point phenomenally, which is I think he's in his 30s or something. But we'll just use me as an example. I'm 23. What has the government done to help me? Or what have I seen the government do in my entire life that has been remotely positive? All that's happened, I wasn't old enough to kind of recall it, but it was 9/11, it was the Iraq Wars. We crashed the economy in 2008 with the Great Recession. The same people crashed the economy, got bailed out. We passed a shitty corporate half-measure healthcare plan that still left 30 million Americans uninsured and still has 45,000 people dying every year because they don't have access to basic healthcare. That. And then we just go on, and now we're getting into a pandemic where we just did $4.5 trillion for corporations. I'm looking at this man, government has not worked well for me. Now I'm politically, involved and savvy and stuff, so I can look at other, nations, be like, oh wow, if we had something closer to what's going on in Denmark or in just the other Scandinavian countries, government could be a lot better. So I'm still optimistic, we can make change happen. But people around my age who aren't politically in touch, all they know is the government takes my tax money. And I don't know where it goes. They just take it. It's just gone. They've not seen government work for them. The way that, these boomers, the people who are going out there and voting are I remember, maybe they do remember, when Medicaid and, not Medicare, I think Medicare was under FDR, but Medicaid at least was under LBJ, and they're saying the government can do things that help people. A lot of young people have not seen that, so they're just simply not inspired, and they're not turning out to vote because they haven't seen anything affect them. And now you have this candidate Bernie Sanders who would have done that, who was going up there and being listen, I can help you guys out. We're going to swing for the fences. We're going to do a Green New Deal. We're going to cancel student loan debt. We are going to do Medicare for all. Jobs guarantee. I'm more in favor of UBI, but there was this individual who really could have inspired them, and now they're not coming out to vote. And that goes into the next thing that Joe Biden does not have, which is support, like enthusiastic support in and of itself. There was a poll from, I wish I remember, this was like, 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago or something, that was breaking down Donald Trump's supporters and Joe Biden supporters and whether they are very enthusiastic, somewhat enthusiastic, or not very enthusiastic. And Trump, I think he was in like the 50s or something. Like, I think it was like 59% are very enthusiastic to vote for Trump. And Joe Biden, just 24% of his own supporters. This is before Bernie dropped out. 24% of his own supporters were very enthusiastic to vote for him. He doesn't have support of his own supporters. You can't win with that. Just like I think today or yesterday, I lose track of days. Don't blame me. Today or yesterday, the New York Post came out with a poll that was like a majority of Democrats want to replace Joe Biden with like Andrew Cuomo. Already, it's been like 48 hours since Bernie dropped out, and people want to replace Joe Biden. It's absurd. It's absurd. And what it's showing is that Joe Biden, like, he does not have anything set up to win. The only reason he has a shot is because everything just went to shit over this past month with unemployment skyrocketing. We're probably gonna hit at least 20%. Estimates put as high as 30%. GDP is expected to just get kneecapped coming into this next quarter. The stock market, I'll come out there, I'll clarify it. Stock market is not a good indicator of how regular people are doing. Headline unemployment, not a good indicator of how regular people are doing. But they are indicators. And the stock market dropped, I think it bottomed out, over this past month at like 18.5, like the Dow Jones, 18.5. Now it's up to like 23, which is absurd. It peaked at 29,000 around in like mid to late February. It just fell through the ground floor. And it's come back up to like 23,000 now, even after jobs report. Like, they'll come out and be like, yes, 6.6 million more people filed for unemployment this week. It's 10 times the amount of the previous record from 1985, and the Dow Jones goes up like 4 points. Like, yeah, that's wonderful. That's what we like to see. But even then, like, it was at the point where it was right. The stock market fell a lot, and there are a lot of people who will eat up, who believe or have some, kind of investments in the stock market who are like, damn, Trump really, screw the pooch on this one. He really dropped the ball. I don't know if I'll support him. I think that's a small actor. I think the people with them, it's like, yes, the Republicans will make the stock market go high. It's just an ideology. It's fundamental. It's not open for discussion. It's just that's a natural fact. But now with everything just getting thrown up into the mix, and now healthcare is a big thing, and Donald Trump very famously, tried to repeal the Affordable Care Act. He gutted it anyway. People might be like, okay, well, healthcare is going to be my number one thing. Democrats are better than Republicans on healthcare. That's one of those other things that's just like, okay, this is true. Like, Republicans are good with the economy. Democrats are good with healthcare. In essence, not that both of them are wrong, but they're mainly wrong. Yeah, that's something else. But they might look at Joe Biden, who's he's obviously not gonna cut the Affordable Care Act, and be like, no, we need him because, with 35 million people losing their jobs, you have that same number of people, maybe more, maybe less, because you have dependents, and maybe, you're married to somebody who still has their job and their health insurance. That's people who are going to be uninsured, moving forward. So a lot of people are going to be voting on healthcare. So there's a chance Joe Biden has it just with this going on. If it weren't for this pandemic, though, it would be game over. The attack ads write themselves. Joe Biden can't even put a coherent sentence together. He forgets where he is more often than not. And the right has already started to drum up and bring out very powerful attack ads against Joe Biden that, man, it makes snake emojis look like nothing. I mean, snake emojis were already nothing. But if you have liberals clutching their pearls, white knuckling their pearls because of snake emojis, they're not gonna survive through a grueling general election. It's 7 months out, and it's gonna be painful for them. And that's the kind of thing is Joe Biden is he's not ready to take charge and take the mantle of this. A great kind of observation for why this is, or why even Joe Biden knows he's not ready at all, is he's unable to win over the left. His overtures to the left have been middle fingers. He released two policy plans that he's picking up, and this is his olive branch. He's going to lower Medicare, the age to enroll in Medicare, from 65 to 60. Compare this to Hillary Clinton, who was in favor of reducing the Medicare age to 50 or 55. Joe Biden's overture to the left is, I'm going to reduce it to 60 years old. That means that when you are 30 years old, you just need to live your life again, once more. You need to do those 30 years once more, and then you'll get, that healthcare coverage, the free healthcare coverage that every other developed nation in the world has. You just one more time. So I'm, just over a third of the way there. I'm excited for lowering that, Medicare age. His other thing is, yes, we will cancel, I think a portion of the student debt for people with low to middle incomes who went to public colleges and universities or HBCUs or other things like that. So an extremely means-tested, kind of student loan debt cancellation plan that is just laughable. Those are the two things he has done to reach out to the left. That's all it is. Who has ever seen a general election candidate pivot left? Doesn't happen. When a Democratic candidate becomes a nominee, they've been appealing to the primary, which is obviously to the left of the general electorate. And so now if they want to win over some more people in the general electorate, the theory goes, I had some problems with this kind of thinking, is, okay, now we need to move to the center more. We need to get more moderate. We need to tone down our message so we can win over people who, who are torn between the two options and want to see both of them come toward them. I think it's absurd, but again, that's a whole separate thing that I'm sure I'll get into at another point. But he's moving to the left, which is strange from a strategy standpoint of this is how things have been before. But what it's showing is even Joe Biden knows that he's got some weakness going on with the left wing of the party, the Bernie Sanders supporters. But on top of that, it also means that he probably was not ready for to be handed the nomination like this. For him to now start making movements to try to win over the left, these are things he should have been doing throughout the primary cycle, and he failed to do that. And so now he's realizing oh shit, maybe I shouldn't have been talking down to people on the left the entire time. Maybe I need to get their votes. But I also don't think that's happening. Which is, I don't think that he's doing this to win over the left. I think he's doing this to make moderates and centrists think that he's winning over the left. Which is, like I said, there was a poll that came out that's yes, Democrats will want to replace Biden with Cuomo. Cuomo's terrible, by the way. He's god awful. Why is New York City the hotspot in the world? It's because Cuomo sucks. But yeah, Biden is doing this because his entire strategy, this primary, his messaging call to arms for his supporters is, I'm electable. His wife, Jill Biden, famously was getting interviewed with some people why should people vote for your husband? And her reasoning was, well, maybe your candidate is better on healthcare. Maybe they're better in other things, but Joe Biden's the electable one. So Joe Biden, his whole message is, I'm electable. And now you have all these people on the left being like, not electable to us. It's not happening. And maybe there's some centrists who are legitimately worried, like, is he not going to win now because, the left wing, the Bernie Sanders supporters, the DSA Rose Twitter people, they don't like him. Is that going to be a problem? I saw on Twitter, like, after Super Tuesday, when Joe Biden did really well, like, pro Biden, like, Facebook pages, they weren't celebrating. They're like, oh no, like, we're seeing that, like, Sanders supporters aren't going to come out to vote for him. This is a big concern of ours. So I think what it is Joe Biden is trying to come out there and be like, listen, all my supporters who are now not going to be who are now, considering their support for me because they're realizing I'm not electable. I am electable. I'm going to win over the left with this one simple trick. Two simple tricks of just means testing student loan cancellation and reducing Medicare to 60. They'll love that. Now, the reason why I believe that he is doing this to appease kind of the moderates and not to actually win over the left is he's never tried to win over the left. Not a single thing he has done has been to, make sure the left likes him. He said, I have no empathy for millennials. He's told like 4 different people to vote for somebody else if they don't like him. Even saying to one guy, like, vote for Trump, vote for Trump. Like, what he is doing is he is making a bet. It's not even a calculated bet. What he's saying is, these people have to vote for me because I'm the Democrat. I'm the closest they're going to get. So he's made the calculation, or his staff has made the calculation, that Donald Trump is such an existential threat that all of the people who are even slightly left-leaning, or mainly all the people who are super left-leaning, who don't like Biden, Trump's so existential, they have to swallow that pill and vote for Biden. That's why he thinks he doesn't need to win them over. Because he's like, my opponent is so, god-awful, terrible, is so repulsive that people will be forced to vote for me. And it's a risky political calculation. I don't even know if it ever really pays off. I think that's just pure hubris coming out, where he's just saying, like, yeah, I've got it already in the bag. It's already done. Like, I don't need to worry about this with that. I just need to win over these moderate suburban Republicans. They don't exist. So Biden's out. Biden's out. I wish. Bernie's out. Biden is now leading the charge. We'll see how he goes from here, but it's really looking to be difficult for Democrats to gin up the support that they're going to need come November. Now, here's the thing, is we're 7 months from the general election. If this past month is any indication of how things might be, we could be 7 months. It could be an election between like a toaster and like 3 bananas. There's no idea where things will be 7 months from now, and we'll see. Anyway, that's what we got. That is the wrap up for the AwryTimeLine for this week. It's absurd. So have a good one, and I'll see you next week.